What up, cucks? It's your boy, the Hater, up in this piece. And it's time for yet another episode of Hater Outdoors, motherfuckers. Hater Outdoors. Now, that being said, we need to talk about a few things here before we get going, right? The Hater is growing big time, and I'm not sure if I thanked you guys enough. I mostly talked about my new goals. So I do want to say thank you to everyone once again. You know what I mean? Like, it's gotten to the point now where I'm growing very fast, so I can't really appreciate the subscribers like I used to with subscriber shout-outs. But this is a shout-out to all of you, you know what I'm saying? So let's hit them goals. If you're here and you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Please hit the subscribe button. It helps your boy a lot. Comment, like, share, do all that because, you know, that's how we roll up in this part. You know what I'm saying? Now, that being said, today's wrestler review is about, obviously, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Many people will argue that he is the greatest wrestler of all time, none other than Kurt Angle, all right? Now, I was there the whole time for Kurt Angle's career, so I can actually talk about this very, very well. So, Kurt Angle debuts, right? He debuts as this Olympic hero, right? But the underpinnings of the gimmick are obviously that he's meant to be booed, right? Because all the vignettes are about how great Kurt Angle is and how everyone should be privileged to be in Kurt Angle's presence, right? Now, beyond that, the actual gimmick of an Olympic wrestler is kind of boring, right? So, you know, people are thinking, oh, this guy's not going to get over, he's going to be boring, right? But boy, were we wrong. So Kurt Angle comes up, and he has undeniable charisma and mic skills, right? He plays the part perfectly, right? He's obnoxious, he's annoying, and young Hater, when I was small, I didn't like this at all. Obviously, that was the intended consequence. But I do remember this. Even though I didn't like it, I didn't like the character of Kurt Angle, I would still look forward to seeing him every week, right? I would still look forward to see what he was doing because he was a captivating wrestler, you know? It wasn't the matches so much as it was the fact that I just wanted to see people beat this guy. So Kurt Angle goes on an undefeated streak, and it's really, really good. It's really, really nice. Everything works perfectly to his benefit, right? He's beating up a bunch of, you know, lower-level jobbers and stuff, right? And the storyline quickly becomes who's going to beat Kurt Angle first, right? Who's going to be the guy to end Kurt Angle's win streak? Here we go to Royal Rumble 1999, I believe it was. Or was it 2000? I always forget these Royal Rumbles. I think it was 1999, right? The one that The Rock won. Anyways, in that event, the one in Madison Square Garden, one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time, and probably the first, I think it was the first pay-per-view I ever got. Definitely the first one I ever got, but I think it's the first one I ever watched, too. I may have seen, like, some of the old pay-per-views, like getting them from Blockbuster or something, but this was the first one that I watched live, right? I was obviously a huge fan of The Rock, and I was hoping The Rock would win. I didn't realize how a Royal Rumble worked, really, because I hadn't seen one before, so I'm like, oh, like, there's a possibility The Rock gets thrown out in the first 10 people. You know, I didn't know, right? I didn't know that, like, the booking would be so, like, one-sided, right? But that was a good surprise to me. But Kurt Angle in this pay-per-view wrestles Taz. The crowd goes nuts for Taz. Kurt Angle gets choked out. Now, Kurt Angle goes on a petition, basically, about how getting choked out doesn't count because chokes are illegal in WWE, right? That was pretty funny. I enjoyed that at all. Like, a lot, I should say. Then The Rock beats him clean, and I'm like, oh, shit, you know? Maybe now Kurt Angle's going to just go on this, like, career decline, right? Maybe now he's not going to be as interesting anymore. Nope, I was wrong. But up until now, I'll consider this to be the first run of Kurt Angle. He gets a solid, we're going to say a 9 out of 10 in this one, right? A 9 out of 10. It's going to be very hard for a wrestler to get a 10 out of 10 on the Hater, right? So he gets a 9 out of 10. Actually, no, I'm going to say a 10 out of 10 because during this time, that's all I can remember is Kurt Angle, really. Like, there's a few other, you know, bright spots, but if you compare him to, like, Jericho and stuff like that, his run was better. So he does really well. He's always on the show. And then we move on to the second part of his run, his mid-card run, right? He immediately wins both the Intercontinental and the European titles, and he becomes the first ever Eurocontinental champion. Now, I know what you're thinking. D'Lo Brown did the same thing, but everybody knows, as Kurt Angle said, that D'Lo Brown doesn't count. So the comedy is ramping up. Everything's getting better and better and better, right? This second run, he's feuding a lot with Jericho and Benoit, and eventually he kind of starts separating himself from the pack. Even though he's still firmly a mid-carder, Kurt Angle eventually starts feuding with Triple H in what is one of the greatest storylines that Triple H has ever been involved in, right? The storyline was that Kurt Angle and Stephanie McMahon become really good friends. And Kurt Angle basically is just like, you know, kind of making a move on her, right? But because he's such a goof and he's so innocent, right, Triple H doesn't perceive him as a threat. but he should, right? And this leads to a great match between the two where Stephanie McMahon has to make a decision. She chooses Triple H, obviously, right? And Triple H wins. But great feud, great everything, right? Meanwhile, on the days that he's not doing this, he's out there wrestling the mid-carders, right? So this part definitely gets a 10 out of 10, the short run. Then after this, we've got his King of the Ring run. In my opinion, obviously Booker T is the best King of the Ring ever, if you ask me. But this was a close second. King Kurt. King Kurt was just great because he would come out with a scepter and the crown and he would just be this goofy dude, right? But more importantly than the actual run was the King of the Ring tournament. This was the best King of the Ring tournament maybe ever, right? There were a lot of people, the matches were quick, and there were a lot of people that could have won, right? There were a lot of people that were like on the cusp, could have been Benoit, could have been Rikishi. Ultimately, it ends up being none other than Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle wins. I think he beats Rikishi in the finals, and he gets the customary SummerSlam title match, right? Now, we'll include the SummerSlam title match, which was pretty good. Kurt Angle's first WWE title, and this run gets a 10 easily, right? Then after this, Kurt Angle has, in my opinion, it's easily a 10. His world title run was easily a 10. He has so many great defenses, but most importantly, the most important part of this run was the Armageddon Hell in a Cell, where it's like literally the 6 best guys in the company, and Kurt Angle somehow comes out on top. I'm talking Kurt, I'm talking Triple H, I'm talking Stone Cold, I'm talking Rock, I'm talking The Undertaker player, and I'm talking Rikishi. Maybe it wasn't Triple H, maybe it was Kane. I don't remember, but one of them, it was either Triple H or Kane. Great match, obviously something to really look forward to. It felt like the biggest match ever, right? Because you had literally the best guys. And Kurt has a 1 in 6 chance of winning this, right? I mean, obviously you know that Rikishi's not going to win probably, right? But all the other guys could easily have become champion that day, and they didn't. Kurt Angle became champion, right? After this, we transitioned really quickly into the invasion angle. And I'm going to do a rare thing here. I'm going to give Kurt Angle an 11 out of 10 in this run. So we always round down, so Kurt Angle might actually get a 10 out of 10. It's possible, right? Kurt Angle then pretty much carries the entire Alliance angle, right? Nobody thought that Kurt Angle would be one of the big players during the Alliance, but because there were so few WCW guys, Kurt Angle becomes like the hero. He gets massively over, right? Probably the most over he's ever been. And he kicks ass in doing this as well, right? He's just dominating left and right. Obviously, during this time, like right after he became champion, he was still a main eventer. Like he had a great match with Undertaker, where the feud was Kurt Angle got overzealous and destroyed Taker's bike, basically. Great stuff, right? But the Alliance angle, he at least an 11, maybe a 12 out of 10. Fuck it, I'm gonna give him a 12 out of 10 because he really stood out. It was him and The Rock that stood out, and of course Stone Cold on the other side. Everybody else played second fiddle to these guys. And if you consider who else was there to play second fiddle to them, it's insane. We had Jericho, Kane, Undertaker, Big Show, Booker T, the Dudleys, RVD. We had like everybody during this time. And Kurt Angle was easily the third most important guy here, right? The two most important guys were Stone Cold and The Rock, that goes without saying. But Kurt Angle, here's how you know. In the Survivor Series that ended the Alliance angle, the last 2 men were Stone Cold and The Rock. And Kurt Angle was the reason why The Rock won. So he was clearly positioned to be the third guy. Then after this, he kind of hovers in the main event and he drops down to the mid-card, right? He's like starting to feud with Edge and people like that. They shave his head. But during this time, he's still like amazing. But nevertheless, we have to be consistent. We had to give this run a 9. He had some of the best matches ever, right? Actually, no, I have to give this a 10 only because of this. By the next King of the Ring, Kurt Angle is once again in the King of the Ring, the one that Edge wins. He's once again in the King of the Ring. So first he wrestles like Christian, I think, and he beats Christian. And Edge beats Rhino. And then during that same pay-per-view, Kurt Angle has one of the greatest matches ever against Shane, where he does a belly-to-belly suplex like 3 times to Shane, eventually breaking the glass. I think twice, actually. So he breaks the glass twice, but a few of those belly-to-bellies didn't get it done. Shout out to Shane. Then he wrestles Edge again and loses, right? So this is the wrestling machine was born that day. So this also gets a 10 out of 10. I got to give it props, man. I think Kurt Angle's getting a 10 out of 10 on this run. But then, after this, Kurt Angle is kind of like in limbo, but always a big deal, right? Brock Lesnar gets introduced, and Kurt Angle has an incredible feud with Brock Lesnar, culminating in some of the best matches of all time, right? He has Team Angle by his side. Kurt Angle is just always on top of his game. And basically, this ends with Kurt Angle turning face and eventually beating Lesnar as well. Lesnar beats him back, but it doesn't matter. Kurt Angle just comes back as this like super baby face, and he kicks ass in this one, another 10 out of 10. We're just stacking 10s here, right? The only question here is, do we have any more 11s or 12s? Because there were some things that Kurt Angle did that were kind of mid, right? He had a few title runs in SmackDown and things like that. Those, we're going to umbrella that into 10 out of 10s because in this run, I'm going to include his match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 21, which to this day stands as the greatest wrestling match I've ever seen in my life. During his title reign, he also had some other noteworthy classics. There was two matches he had with Benoit. One was like a 30-minute Iron Man submission match, amazing match. And the other one was for the world title, Benoit versus Angle, where like this is the only time when I'm like, oh my God, Benoit's amazing. It's like, it was like a perfect match. One of my favorite, probably my second favorite match of all time. So with all that being said, Kurt Angle gets another 11 in this one. Now, let's get to some of the downturns, right? I'm not gonna go through every little stint. There was ECW Kurt Angle, right? ECW Kurt Angle, the wrestling machine. The wrestling machine being born was awesome, right? But I do feel like this was not really captured, right? So with all that being said, we have no choice but to give this one an 8 out of 10, right? He was still Kurt Angle, but he wasn't doing much. Like he was being managed by Daivari and like stupid shit like that. This was like so far below Kurt Angle, right? Then Kurt Angle asks for his release and goes to TNA, where he has banger after banger after banger. For those that don't know, aside from the Shawn Michaels and a few Benoit matches, the best parts of Kurt Angle's career were in TNA, right? Over there, I mean, like, it's almost insane. Like, this guy's going to get a 10, right? The beginning, right? The beginning of TNA where he's feuding with Samoa Joe and establishing himself as the dominant force that he always has been and he always would be, right? He wins that. He dominates there. He beats Samoa Joe, the first guy to do so in TNA. And he proves himself as being one of the number one wrestlers in the world, right? Then after this, right, we get to, in my opinion, Kurt Angle's career highlight. I know this is going to be controversial, but I'm going to give this one a 12 out of 10, cucks. The Main Event Mafia. The Main Event Mafia is one of the best factions of all time, one of the best things that ever happened in TNA of all time, right? And he gets the 12 out of 10 because he carried this, right? There was a point where Kurt Angle had all the titles in TNA, right? He had the tag team titles, I think, with Sting. I don't remember. I think it was with Sting. He had the world title and the X Division title, and he defended all three in one night. He lost the tag team titles after turning on Sting. Jay Lethal and him had a banger of a match, and Jay Lethal won. And then after that, Kurt Angle defended his world title against Sting. It was amazing, right? I think it was against Sting. I could be wrong. But the point is, 3 matches in one night. Once again, this is a 12 out of 10 run easily, right? All the Main Event Mafia stuff was great. Kurt Angle didn't need to do any of this, but he rechristened himself the godfather of the Main Event Mafia. He'd come out in a suit with like a rose. He like kind of grew his hair a little bit, have a little cul-de-sac haircut to make him seem more legit. It was great, right? Then the rest of his TNA run, I'm just going to lump it into one, was hit and miss, right? Hit and miss. I'm going to give it a 9, right? I'm going to give it a 9 as like a weak point of Kurt Angle's legendary career. Now, for everybody else, this would be like the highlight of their career, but Kurt Angle, you know, he had a few matches that didn't really matter, right? He's like out there feuding with like, you know, James Storm and Bobby Roode and Eric Young, and this was just like the downfall of TNA. I blame it more on TNA, but even during this time, he had great moments, right? He main evented Bound for Glory. You know, he was there. He was a constant force. Long story short, eventually he leaves TNA, and then he goes to the Indies where he does a bunch of shit, but nobody cares. And then he comes back to WWE. And what should have been a boring run wasn't. He nailed it, right? First of all, he comes back, and number one, he helps the Shield in their match, right? He joins the Shield, because I think, who was that? I think Roman Reigns got injured. Someone got injured from the Shield, and he joined the Shield, right? And it was just amazing. It was just like, it's like, he saved this pay-per-view and he saved this match. And though they rushed Kurt Angle's in-ring return, right, it was still well done because it's still Kurt Angle. On top of that, he had the very memorable tag match in Ronda Rousey's debut. Without him, that match would have been garbage, right? The only reason to watch that match, it wasn't Ronda Rousey and Stephanie McMahon. It was Triple H and Kurt Angle once again. So Kurt Angle saves that pay-per-view, in my opinion. That was obviously the main match of that pay-per-view. It wasn't the main event, but it was the main match. It's just like when Donald Trump had his WrestleMania moment, like that was the main match. It wasn't the main event, but it was the main match, right? So Kurt Angle once again saves it, and then eventually he wrestles Baron Corbin in a decent match, but that's whatever. That was just to like give Baron Corbin the run, and because the rub, I should say. But because of that, I can't give this one, I can't give it a 10. It has to be a 9. But I can't really, okay, we'll give it a 9, a strong 9. Now, everything in this run has been 10s basically, except for I give them a 12, 2 9s, and, no, 12, 2 9s, and 11, and I believe an 8. But we are also going to bump the score up a little bit based on the fact that Kurt Angle deserves a 10. It's as simple as that, motherfuckers. We can't give... At first, I was like, all right, this is probably going to end up being a 9 because there's a few bad moments, but we can't really like hold those against him, right? A career this long and this prominent, he deserves a 10, you know? But the hater is consistent. The hater is consistent. So we got to add the 8, the 9, and the 9. That gives us 26. We got to add the 11. We got to add the 12. And that gives us something that ends with a 9. So even though Kurt Angle gets a 9.999 or whatever the fuck it would be, because all the 10s we would add up those two, the hater is consistent. And in the hater channel, we round down. So Kurt Angle is going to get a 9 out of 10, unfortunately. But I think that's actually fair because I don't think we're ever going to get a 10 on this series because it's such a stringent thing. Maybe like The Undertaker, maybe Shawn Michaels, some of them have had multiple 12 out of 10 runs. So like you know, you might give The Undertaker's WrestleMania period like a 15 out of 10 for all we know, right? We do give more than 15, you know, than 10 out of 10s, but we have to round as we round it, and I think I was fair. Kurt Angle gets a 9, one of the GOATs, one of my favorite performers to ever watch. So, you know, obviously if you haven't seen the matches that I've mentioned, you got nothing to do with your life, go watch them. Go watch them. Go watch Kurt Angle, cuckolds.